when a famously eccentric doctor and his partner constructed a satanically inspired mansion in rural Georgia in 1977. They named it the Corpsewood Manor. Just 5 years later, this intriguing abode became the scene of a chilling crime, making its ominous name a haunting reality. As we delve into the dark and mysterious story of the Corpsewood Manor, we uncover the gruesome murders that turned it into a true crime destination. This is the strange case of the Corpsewood Manor murders. Dr. Charles Lee Scudder was born on October 6, 1926,
in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, USA, to parents Charles Morrison and Eleanor Edith Lee. During the 1940s, he attended Oberlin College, where he participated in the school's drama program and studied music and art. As a young man, he displayed exceptional intelligence and a wide range of interests. Scudder later studied at Loyola University and Loyola's Stritch School of Medicine, earning degrees in zoology, languages, and chemistry, and ultimately obtaining a PhD in pharmacology. At Loyola, he studied under Dr. Alexander Karchmar. Following his graduation, Scudder became the Associate Director of the Institute for Mind, Drugs, and Behavior at Loyola University of Chicago and served as an Associate Professor of Pharmacology at Loyola's Stritch School of Medicine, balancing roles as both a researcher and instructor. In a later interview, Karchmar described Scudder as a unique and eccentric individual, noting his habits of dyeing his hair in colors like purple and red and keeping a monkey as a pet. Scudder was also a skilled harp player and had even been invited to perform with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. According to Dr. Karchmar, Scudder had a deep belief in the unity of the universe and published experimental results on this subject. On September 10, 1946, Scudder married his first wife, Helen Kilbourne Hazlett, in St. Joseph, Berrien, Michigan. Helen, who was born in Chicago, Illinois, had studied with him at Oberlin College. Their marriage eventually ended in divorce. A few years later, in the early 1950s, he married Bortai Bunting, the daughter of British modernist poet Basil Bunting and Marion Culver. Scudder and Bortai had 4 sons together, namely Saul, Gideon, Fenris, and Ahab, before they eventually separated as well. In 1959, Scudder met Joseph Odom and brought him on as his personal assistant and housekeeper. Joseph, known to everyone as Joey, was 12 years younger than Scudder and took on the roles of cook and housekeeper for Dr. Scudder and his sons. They lived together in an aging mansion on Adams Street on Chicago's west side, which Scudder had purchased. The mansion, built in 1904 and designed by a student of Frank Lloyd Wright, was located in a rough neighborhood. Despite this, Scudder enjoyed the mansion's fading grandeur and the ample space it provided for his various hobbies, including collecting antiques, creating his own paintings, playing the harp, caring for 2 large English mastiffs, and engaging in lively correspondence with individuals and institutions, including Anton LaVey. Scudder and Odom were irresistibly drawn to each other and soon became inseparable. Their strong bond would endure for the rest of their lives, despite their differences. Scudder was highly educated and cultured, while Odom was a blue-collar worker who had left school in the 5th grade and had a troubled past with the law. Dr. Scudder wrote about him saying, "He'd learned far more about the world than I had with all my degrees, and somewhere along the line he'd developed a talent for whipping up meals fit for a king." Odom dreamed of cooking on a wood stove and living a simpler life. Neighbors and visitors to Corpsewood still remembered Odom for his exceptional culinary skills. By the 1970s, Scudder's sons had all grown up and moved out to pursue their own lives. Scudder and Odom, who had been hired in 1959 to help with the children and had since become lovers, continued living in the mansion. However, Dr. Scudder grew disillusioned with his career and weary of the deteriorating neighborhood. On December 17, 1975, after several months of searching for land in the southeast, Dr. Scudder purchased the southeast quarter of Lot 248 in the 6th Land District of Chattooga County, Georgia, from John S. Cooper of Floyd County for $10,500. In 1976, on his 50th birthday, Scudder resigned from Loyola University of Chicago and relocated with his partner, friend, and housekeeper Odom to Chattooga County, Georgia, seeking a simpler lifestyle in the mountains of the Chattahoochee National Forest. He decided to leave his academic position to live off the grid in a rural, self-sustaining environment. Frustrated with the challenges of academic research, he yearned for the tranquility of nature and a degree of isolation. Consequently, he purchased 40 acres of undeveloped mountainous land in rural Georgia. Scudder and Odom arrived at their property during an ice storm, bringing their 2 dogs and whatever they could fit in their Jeep and small camper van. As they made their way to the hilltop, they encountered a dead horse blocking the logging trail, which they instantly and jokingly named Dead Horse Road. With no existing living quarters on the property, Scudder purchased a trailer to serve as their temporary home during the construction process, which ultimately took over 2 years. They built a castle-like house of Scudder's own design atop a mountain, naming it Corpsewood Manor, in honor of the appearance of the surrounding trees when they arrived that winter. Scudder dedicated 6 years to building, digging, planting, and nurturing the land that sustained him and his companion. Odom planted a rose garden and enjoyed cooking on a wood stove. Hunters often visited them, enjoying their hospitality. The property included a vineyard, which they utilized as amateur winemakers. They formed friendships with some locals, who brought them fruit to be turned into Dr. Scudder's homemade wine. A wedding was also hosted in the rose garden, with Dr. Scudder playing the harp from the sun deck above the gazebo. In addition to their main residence, Scudder and Odom built a smaller 3-story structure on the property to serve both practical and personal needs. The first floor functioned as a chicken coop, while the second floor was used as a food pantry. The top level, known as the Pink Room, was dedicated entirely to pleasure. Here, the couple indulged in various hedonistic activities and invited others to join them. The parties they hosted in the Pink Room became legendary for their extreme debauchery, with abundant sex and drugs that delighted the regular attendees. However, the scandalous reputation of these gatherings also attracted attention from curious outsiders. While the Pink Room allowed for unrestricted indulgence, inappropriate behavior was strictly forbidden inside the manor. To Scudder and Odom, their living area was a home, not a place of immorality. This rule applied to both guests and themselves. They kept their hedonistic activities separate from their domestic life. An unspoken boundary had been established early in their relationship, which they both respected. In the Pink Room, they could freely indulge without fear of consequences. Although most community members chose to mind their own business, the more religious locals began spreading rumors that the mild-mannered newcomers were actually devil worshippers. Scudder continued his artistic pursuits, painting and crafting stained glass pieces for the windows of the house. Among his creations was a stained glass Baphomet sigil, a symbol associated with the Church of Satan. His interest in the occult was evident in the pentagrams painted on his black Jeep and in the catalogues and books found in the house. While Scudder openly embraced Satanism, Odom, in contrast, claimed to be Catholic. Scudder made no effort to conceal his religious affiliations and even discussed his involvement with the Church of Satan openly, despite potential consequences. To further express his interests, he adorned Corpsewood with stone gargoyles and commissioned a bed headboard featuring a demon's face carved into the wood. Despite his outward appearances, Scudder was not a devil worshipper. Rather, he believed in enjoying earthly pleasures without succumbing to guilt. Those who knew him well attested to his kindness, stating that he wouldn't harm a fly. If anything, his sin was his refusal to let others dictate his actions or beliefs. However, even those disposed towards Scudder and Odom eventually began to label them as the devil worshippers. Despite this negative characterization, many locals still visited Corpsewood to admire the progress of its cautious conviviality. Life at Corpsewood, while mostly enjoyable, had its challenges. Scudder gradually realized that self-reliance came with its own set of drawbacks. On particularly difficult days, he found himself longing for the simplicity of a time when others handled life's problems. Yet, when these moments of despair subsided, Scudder would look around at everything he and Odom had accomplished, and a sense of contentment would wash over him. On December 12, 1982, the life that Scudder and Odom had so carefully crafted was shattered when Tony West and Avery Brock, accompanied by their friends Joey Wells and Teresa Hudgens, visited Corpsewood Manor. Tony and Avery believed that Scudder was secretly wealthy and that the manor held valuable treasures. They planned to eliminate Scudder and Odom so they could take over the property. Upon arrival, the group of 4 went up the 3rd floor of the chicken house referred to as the Pink Room and joined Scudder. They drank wine and sniffed a concoction made of varnish, paint thinner and other substances in a plastic bag. Odom, who had looked forward to a quiet evening at home, had opted not to participate. Instead of joining in the activities, he had stayed in the main house with the dogs. Although Brock had visited the house several times before and had planned to rob it with West while Wells and Hudgens acted as lookouts, their plans quickly turned disastrous. After about an hour of casual conversation, Brock made an excuse to leave, claiming he had forgotten something in his truck. Meanwhile, West, Wells, and Hudgens kept Scudder occupied. Brock returned with a rifle he had retrieved from his truck, holding it tightly. Upon re-entering the house, Brock cornered Odom and fatally shot him in the chest at close range. He then searched for the dogs and found them asleep by the wood stove, where he killed them as well. Returning to the pink room, Brock made no attempt to conceal the rifle as he rejoined the others. Despite being heavily intoxicated, Scudder noticed the weapon and jokingly said, "Bang, bang," before turning away from the drug-fueled party. A few minutes later, Brock and West forcefully lifted Scudder to his feet, making it clear to him that the situation was actually serious. They escorted him to the main residence. Meanwhile, Wells and Hudgens attempted to leave out of fear, seeking refuge in the safety of the truck. However, West ordered them to return. The two young men, whom Scudder had considered friends, took a cruel pleasure in revealing the lifeless bodies of Odom and the dogs to him. Once they believed Scudder was sufficiently shocked into sobriety, they sat him down on a chair, bound his hands and feet, and demanded to know where he kept his money. Scudder explained that he had invested all his funds into the manor and insisted there were no hidden riches on the property. However, they weren't buying that, and they were not about to give up easily either. In a sudden move, Scudder rose from his chair and began to shuffle toward Odom's lifeless body while Brock and West argued about their next steps. West commanded Scudder to sit back down, but Scudder continued his aimless murmuring, determined to reach his partner's side. Seeing this, West seized the rifle and aimed it directly at Scudder, the man whose life they had just shattered. Just as West was about to pull the trigger, Scudder suddenly became completely lucid. Facing his assailant, he calmly uttered, "I asked for this." Unaffected by the eerie confession, West fired 5 shots into Scudder's face. With their only guide to the supposed treasure gone, the pair ransacked the house in search of valuables. They even attempted to steal Scudder's harp, but found it too large to fit in their vehicle. Having betrayed the homeowner's trust and committed cold-blooded murder, they left with scarcely more than they possessed upon arrival. Wells and Hudgens, traumatized by the events, went into hiding, while Brock and West fled to Mississippi. There they committed another murder during a carjacking 3 days later, targeting a Navy officer on his way home for Christmas. They stole his car, clothes, and what little cash he had. On December 14th, Raymond Williams, a friend of Scudder, visited Corpsewood Manor to deliver news of a mutual acquaintance's passing in a neighboring town. Receiving no response, he entered the residence and discovered gunshot damage at the door. Concerned, Raymond descended the mountain and went to notify the authorities. Coincidentally, on the same day that the bodies of Scudder and Odom were discovered, Teresa Hudgens voluntarily went to the police station in Somerville, Georgia, and surrendered herself. She explained that she would have come forward earlier, but her boyfriend Wells had prevented her from doing so. Hudgens proceeded to provide the authorities with a detailed account of the events of that fateful night, including the identities of the perpetrators. Following her confession, the dots had been connected and a nationwide manhunt was initiated. Brock and West parted ways in Austin, Texas, after a heated argument about their plans. Brock surrendered to the police in Marietta, Georgia on December, and West was apprehended on Christmas Eve in Chattanooga, Tennessee. According to newspaper reports from the time, during the investigation of the murders, law enforcement officers discovered unsettling items at Corpsewood Manor. These included 2 human skulls, 3 vials allegedly containing lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD-25, various occult tools, a small occult library, a large collection of academic and literature books, and home pornography. The Chattooga County Sheriff's Office labeled Scudder and Odom as devil worshippers based on these findings. Additionally, a painting depicting Scudder gagged with blood dripping from 5 bullet wounds, which he had created months earlier, was found in the house. There had been previous attempts to bring charges against Dr. Scudder and Odom for their unconventional behavior, but these efforts failed due to protections provided by freedom of religion. Their friend Raymond William informed reporters that Charles had become involved with the Church of Satan, but clarified that he wasn't an active participant. "Scudder told me he was actually an atheist and that he joined to explore its beliefs," Raymond explained. Like many others in Chattooga County, Georgia, Raymond was unaware that the philosophy of the Church of Satan is atheistic, and its members may not necessarily worship any supernatural being. Just weeks before his death, Scudder had received a birthday card from the Church of Satan in San Francisco, wishing him a happy 56th birthday. During the trial of West and Brock, accusations were made against Scudder, alleging that he had spiked the wine with LSD in an attempt to engage in oral sex with them. However, when the police tested the bottle of wine, no trace of LSD was found. West attempted to use a defense of involuntary intoxication. His attorney argued he had a motive because he was homosexual. However, the jury disregarded this prejudiced line of argument. Additionally, West confessed to a Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent that he and Brock had planned the murders and robbery a few days prior to the killings. He further disclosed to the GBI agent that Brock wanted to kill Scudder because Scudder had previously engaged in oral sex with Brock. During the trial, Dr. Karchmar was also approached for an interview. During this interview, Karchmar affirmed that Scudder was not a drug user or a follower of devil worship, and that he was trustworthy. He further stated that, to his knowledge, Scudder had never conducted any research involving LSD and appeared to disapprove of drug usage. In an effort to conclude the ordeal, 17-year-old Avery Brock pleaded guilty to all charges and received 3 consecutive life sentences for his involvement in the murders. 30-year-old Tony West was convicted and initially sentenced to death, a penalty later commuted to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Both Brock and West are presently incarcerated in Georgia and have been denied parole on multiple occasions. It is unfortunate what happened to the victims in this case. As we reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. To what many perceived as the perfect family, no one expected that everything would quickly go down in flames. At around 4 a.m. of August 26, 2008, the Shropshire Central Fire Control received the emergency call about a fire on the Osbaston Mansion residence. Upon arrival, firefighters were hindered by a large horsebox that blocked the entrance. By the time they managed to get in, due to the issues they faced trying to enter the residence in the first place, it was already too late and everything had been consumed by the fire. This unfortunately included the owners of the residence, the Foster family. During the investigations, the police found out that the horse trailer that had been blocking the entrance had been deliberately parked there to delay the firefighters. Therefore, this wasn't just an accident. Something far more sinister was behind it. The question arose, who harbored animosity towards this beloved family? Who could be responsible for their tragic demise? The unsettling discovery in the footages recovered by the investigators from the security cameras gave them the answers they sought, but in turn, also sent chills down their spines. This is the shocking case of the Foster family. Christopher Foster, always destined for success, was characterized by his mother, Enid, as a proactive achiever who sought opportunities for financial gain from a very young age. He shared aspirations with his younger brother, Andrew Foster, of emulating their late father, who was a sales director, as they wanted to be successful businessmen. However, despite their common goal, Chris and Andrew's relationship had always been strained since childhood. Andrew later revealed the difficulties in their bond, attributing it to childhood dynamics. Chris, perceived as more confident and self-assured, cast a shadow over his quieter and less assertive brother, Andrew. Both siblings, however, maintained a close relationship with their mother, Enid, who cherished them both, though harboring a special fondness for Chris. In 1987, Chris tied the knot with Jill, a housewife who later gave birth to their daughter and only child, Kirsty, in 1993. Chris's journey to wealth and success in the late 80s began when he worked as a salesman, selling mattresses and cheap pizza boxes for insulation. All changed, and his life took a transformative turn when he witnessed a news report leading him to establish a prosperous engineering company. This venture ultimately propelled him to self-made millionaire status, thanks to the development of a groundbreaking insulation material that would be widely utilized in the oil industry as a result of what he saw on the news. The Piper Alpha oil rig explosion on July 6, 1988, resulted in a devastating fire lasting for days and claiming 167 lives. Chris astutely seized this tragedy as an opportunity, identifying a niche market for fire-protected insulation tailored to gas and oil rigs. Although several oil companies expressed interest, they demanded proof of the product's efficacy before committing to any contracts. To meet this requirement, Chris took a significant financial risk by mortgaging his house for £5,000 to fuel a demonstration. The successful test, where Ulvershield, as he named it, displayed exceptional resilience compared to other oil rig insulations that burst into flames and even earned a rare A1 fire test rating. Major oil corporations promptly placed orders, catapulting Christopher Foster into millionaire status almost overnight. Reports circulated that he was accumulating so much money that he did not know what to do with it. As his business expanded, Christopher experienced a significant increase in turnover, soaring from £50,000 to £1 million annually. According to his personal assistant, it seemed as though Chris was put on earth for the sole purpose of spending a lot of money. Although he allocated himself a monthly salary of £10,000, he was known to withdraw an additional £15,000 from the company's accounts for personal expenses. By 2004, Chris's net worth was reported to be £10 million. During that same year, after a shopping excursion, Chris and his wife Jill had come back home when Jill stumbled upon a house while perusing the pages of Shropshire Life magazine that really captured her attention. This was no ordinary house. It was the Osbaston House, an exquisite mansion nestled in Maesbrook, an affluent village in Shropshire, England. Spanning 16 acres, the property boasted a private lake and even had riding paddocks. Despite the around £1.5 million asking price, the residence still required some work. Jill was so enamored with the property that Chris promptly submitted an offer the following morning. The Fosters quickly sold their own home, relocating to the Osbaston House. Subsequently, Chris invested an additional £50,000 in installing a swimming pool and landscaping. After settling into their new home, Chris indulged in a lavish lifestyle, acquiring 2 Porsches, one for himself and one for Jill, a James Bond-style Aston Martin, Range Rovers, a tractor, and various other vehicles. Their daughter Kirsty was enrolled in an exclusive private boarding school, and Chris also bought her a number of horses. Kirsty spent time with her horses whenever she wasn't at school, and engaging in riding competitions was described by friends as quiet, caring, and kind. On top of that, Chris also bought 4 dogs and several doves. Chris further enhanced their lifestyle by hiring a housekeeper and a personal assistant, and the house was adorned with over £200,000 worth of antique furnishings. Chris's most expensive hobby seemed to be his passion for shooting, evident in his ownership of numerous high-priced guns ranging from £12,000 to £12,500 or almost $20,000 at the time. He frequently participated in shooting parties, sometimes extending for 3 days, resulting in bills reaching as high as £8,000. He also had a tendency of leaving his firearms scattered around his residence. Occasionally, when doves caused a mess on his cars, he would shoot them, much to Jill's dismay. In one disturbing incident, Kirsty's black Labrador began bothering the sheep. Unable to control the dog, Chris resorted to taking it down a country lane and shooting it in the head. Although a thriving entrepreneur, Chris lacked long-term vision, characterized as impulsive by acquaintances. He exhibited a desire for instant gratification and swiftly severed ties, holding grudges against those who displeased or went against him. Chris derived satisfaction from others admiring him and coveting his material wealth. Social status held significant sway in his life, and over time, both Chris and Jill ascended to higher social circles. It became evident to Chris's close ones that he harbored a desire to completely disassociate from his Wolverhampton origins. Jill found joy in going for shopping sprees, dedicating her days to pampering herself with activities like nail and hair appointments, along with occasional beauty treatments such as manicures and Botox. Chris and his loved ones frequently embarked on opulent family vacations, luxuriating in top-tier hotels and relishing the finest cuisine money could offer. These extravagant holidays sometimes incurred costs of up to £20,000 each, a sum Chris didn't hesitate to spend. However, unbeknownst to those in his circle, Chris was significantly stretching his financial limits and compensating by withdrawing funds from the business. His unrestrained spending resulted in a financial imbalance, with more money flowing out than coming in. You see, in 2003, Chris signed an exclusive contract with a company called DRC, granting them sole rights to produce the oil rig sealant he had invented. By 2004, as previously mentioned, his net worth had soared to £10 million. However, a year later in 2005, he found himself saddled with £2.8 million in debt. Rather than implementing cost-cutting measures, Chris, consumed by his spending addiction, attempted to address the issue by seeking additional funds from alternative sources. Despite the exclusivity agreement with DRC, he proceeded to sign a second contract with another company for the sale of his product. DRC discovered this breach and took legal action against Chris, ultimately suing him and acquiring his patent. They in turn made it a global success. Chris faced bankruptcy, and in 2007 his company went into liquidation. £3 million worth of his assets were frozen, and his salary ceased. Despite being in dire straits, Chris persisted in carrying on as if nothing significant was happening. Simultaneously, Chris found himself in a dispute with his accountant, who reported him to the Inland Revenue for tax evasion. Chris had neglected to pay VAT, national insurance, and various other taxes. To tackle the mounting tax obligations, he resorted to borrowing from banks, attempting to alleviate the financial strain. Additionally, he remortgaged the Osbaston house 3 times and overdrew from more than 20 different bank accounts. Despite his outwardly lavish lifestyle and continuous spending, Chris managed to conceal the fact that he was deeply submerged in debt. Over the ensuing 12 months, he engaged in his hobby of clay pigeon shooting and still drove around his extravagant cars. People who knew Jill didn't know for certain if she knew the full extent of her husband's financial troubles or if he had shielded her from the harsh reality, but she certainly didn't show signs of reducing her spending either, and she didn't share any concerns with her friends. Chris found himself grappling with overwhelming challenges, aware that time was slipping away and fearing the imminent loss of everything. During a conversation with a friend about houses, Chris emphatically stated that he would never part with Osbaston House unless it was in a body bag. He expressed a solemn commitment to safeguarding his family, vowing to take his own life rather than endure the loss of his loved ones or possessions. Struggling with the pressure to maintain his flashy appearances and having the knowledge that time and also his money was running out, Chris sought professional assistance. On multiple occasions, he confided in his doctor, revealing feelings of depression and having thoughts of taking his life. He started taking antidepressants, but his doctor did not take him seriously regarding his thoughts of ending his own life. Little did anyone know at the time that something unimaginable would occur. In the week preceding the August bank holiday weekend of 2008, Chris stumbled upon a letter from the bailiffs attached to the front gate. The letter conveyed the unsettling news that they intended to return the following Tuesday to reclaim the house and other assets. The housekeeper stated that when she showed him the letter, Chris appeared perplexed, but remained silent. This letter would become the catalyst for the tragic events that unfolded later. The nightmare Chris had been evading was now becoming a harsh reality. Struggling with financial problems, he teetered on the brink of losing all his material possessions, and the impending ordeal was set to be known by everyone, something that he didn't really want. The thought of Kirsty and Jill losing the accustomed lifestyle proved unbearable for Christopher. Kirsty faced parting with her cherished horses, and the family had to face the likelihood of returning to Wolverhampton, bidding farewell to their luxurious way of life. For a man of Chris's pride, such a situation would be deeply humiliating. On August 21st, 2008, a friend reached out to Chris via text, inquiring about his well-being, in which he responded, "Not good. Things are coming to a head for me soon." This communication was the only insight the friend received, unaware of the underlying financial troubles Chris was grappling with. On August 25, 2008, the Fosters received an invitation to attend a barbecue and clay pigeon shooting event. The 50-year-old man, accompanied by his 49-year-old wife and their 15-year-old daughter, then proceeded to join the gathering. None of the attendees noticed any signs of distress in Chris or the other 2 family members. Witnesses recall Chris appearing his usual cheerful self, and even in this photo captured during the event, the family exuded happiness, oblivious to what Chris had planned for later that night. In the preceding week, Chris had delved deeply into suicide websites online and had spent the same afternoon reminiscing over old family photos in the album that reflected happier times. Expressing his desire to leave the party, Chris informed his wife that he had had enough for the night. Although Jill preferred to stay a bit longer, they eventually departed around 8:30 p.m., reaching home just minutes later at 8:44 p.m., with their final moments as a family captured by the home's security footage. Shortly after, Jill retired to bed. At 11:30 p.m., Chris went upstairs to check on Kirsty, urging her to go to bed as she continued texting a friend online. Around midnight, Chris decided to turn off the internet, compelling Kirsty to conclude her conversation with her friend and retire for the night. At 3 a.m., Chris set out to claim his first victim. Using a silenced gun, he entered the room where his wife was asleep and shot her in the back of the head as she lay unsuspecting. He then proceeded to Kirsty's room and inflicted a similar fate upon her. The home's security cameras captured Chris as he took one of his shotguns and ventured outside to the dog kennels. Each dog fell victim to a gunshot to the head as well. Chris then made his way to the barn housing the horses, repeating the same sinister act. Following this, he set the barn ablaze, with all the animals inside. In the footage, Chris appeared methodical and almost robotic, devoid of expression or any semblance of remorse. To impede the firefighters' access to the residence and hinder their efforts to extinguish the fire on time, Chris took action. He drove a horsebox and positioned it in front of the main entrance and shot the tires, deliberately puncturing them to make it harder to move. Subsequently, he strategically placed hosepipes connected to his domestic oil tank, pumping 200 liters of oil into the house's cellar. With his expertise in fires, Chris knew precisely what was required to utterly annihilate the Osbaston house. His mindset seemed rooted in a vengeful desire. If he couldn't retain his material possessions, then no one else should either. Chris then proceeded to ignite the house, dousing his cars and other belongings with the flammable liquid as well. The fire rapidly and fiercely consumed everything. Still armed with a rifle, Chris re-entered the house, making his way to the bedroom where Jill's lifeless body lay. There, he lay beside her, embracing his deceased wife amidst the engulfing flames. Chris's estranged brother, Andrew, speculated that Chris might have wanted the fire to consume him as punishment for his actions that night. It was reported that Chris succumbed to smoke inhalation, with the autopsy revealing no evidence of gunshot wounds, despite having the rifle close to him. At around 4:11 a.m., the security cameras had stopped functioning. A concerned neighbor contacted emergency services upon witnessing the escalating flames. Firefighters swiftly arrived at the residence, but they were met with the impeding horsebox at the main gate. By the time they successfully removed the obstacle, the intensity of the fire had already reached a point where it proved challenging to bring under control. As firefighters battled the raging blaze, neighbors watched in horror as the estate was consumed by flames, expressing deep concern for the now missing owners, the Fosters. In the subsequent days, newspapers and TV stations issued appeals to locate the family, but their efforts yielded no results. Given Chris's affluent status, authorities initiated an investigation, initially suspecting a criminal abduction of the Foster family. At this point, however, neither the bodies nor the security camera footage had been discovered, and so that was what many had speculated had happened to them. The arduous task of extinguishing the flames spanned 3 days. Finally, investigators cautiously entered the remnants of the house and discovered the intertwined remains of Jill and Christopher. Their bodies were bound together, laid on the bed in a room that had collapsed down to the living room area, where they were eventually found. However, there was no trace of Kirsty. Amidst hopeful speculation that she might have escaped, others feared the possibility of her abduction. A few days later, heartbreak ensued as small fragments of Kirsty's remains were discovered amidst the debris. Investigators, employing delicate precision, used brushes to gather Kirsty's remains into a waiting hearse. The discovery of a piece of Kirsty's skull revealed that, tragically, she had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, just like the fate that had befallen her mother. Upon recovering and scrutinizing the bodies, the police directed their suspicions toward Chris as the likely perpetrator of the crimes. Concurrently, an investigation into his financial affairs was initiated. The deeper they delved, the more revelations unfolded about a prosperous businessman who was, in reality, submerged in insurmountable debt. To everyone's surprise, Chris's accumulated debts had amounted to £4 million at that point. As creditors sought to claim his assets, they discovered that Chris had meticulously ensured there was nothing left for them. With the retrieval of security footage, the police confirmed their suspicions. Chris had carried out the murders and his own demise, leaving no note or indication of what he was going through. Speculation arose about the dark motives behind such a brutal crime, with the prevailing theory positing that Chris, consumed by shame over losing his fortune, opted for the heinous act to evade admitting his failures. Others suggested it was the defiant act of a self-centered man who chose to obliterate everything before facing the prospect of loss. Enid struggled with the distressing news, as did everyone else, but she adamantly rejected the notion that Chris could be capable of such actions. She staunchly defended him and harbored considerable sympathy for him. In her perspective, she believed Chris committed the acts out of love for his family, aiming to protect them from losing everything. However, Chris's brother Andrew held a contrasting viewpoint. Having not spoken for 16 years, there were fleeting thoughts of reconciliation for the sake of their mother. But fear restrained Andrew from going to his brother's house with apprehensive thoughts of encountering a potentially hostile situation. Andrew asserted that Chris bullied him during their childhood and had even allegedly sexually assaulted him. This tumultuous history led Andrew to maintain silence for the 16 years. According to him, Chris exhibited traits of a bully and control freak. In response to Andrew's 1999 letter extending an olive branch for a mature conversation, Chris replied with a note demanding a written apology, adding, "You've got to beg and scrape on bended knee to come to me and Jill." Andrew contended that Chris was unwilling to acknowledge his wrongdoings and instead harbored long-standing grudges. 4 months after the devastating tragedy, on December 19, 2008, the funerals for 15-year-old Kirsty and 49-year-old Jill took place at their local village church. The joint funeral was silent and respectful, attended only by a small gathering of intimate friends and family. Both were laid to rest in the same plot. Following the wishes of Jill's family, Chris had a separate funeral and was interred away from Kirsty and Jill. In the years subsequent to the tragedy at the Osbaston house, remnants of the scorched structures and the family's charred belongings, including Kirsty's cherished first aid book for her horses, and even a handwritten note outlining what the family had planned to eat during that week of the tragedy, still lingered on the site. The erstwhile dream home, now reduced to crumbling ruins, persisted until 2011, when all debris was cleared. The 16-acre estate was eventually purchased in 2014, with plans formulated for the construction of a new 6-bedroom house. Although the property was put up for sale in 2012, it remained unsold until 2014, after the price was said to have been reduced. While the motives behind Christopher Foster's shocking deeds may have stemmed from financial struggles and the societal pressure to uphold an affluent and successful facade, it definitely shouldn't have taken such a horrific turn. Tragically, rather than making prudent financial decisions initially or later confiding in his loved ones about his financial woes, Chris chose a path of self-destruction with devastating consequences for all involved. As we reflect on this heartbreaking case, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind. Beneath the turquoise waters of the Great Barrier Reef, a romantic tale took an unforeseen turn, leaving behind a mystery that has fascinated and haunted many. This is the story of Tina Watson, a journey that started with love and adventure but ended in tragedy and unanswered questions. Tina, a young and adventurous woman, embarked on a life-changing journey when she met her future husband, Gabe Watson. Their love story unfolded against the backdrop of the stunning Australian coastline, promising a lifetime of shared adventures. Tina Watson was born in West Germany on February 13, 1977, and placed for adoption. On January 24, 1980, she was officially adopted by Tommy and Cindy Thomas. Growing up with her younger sister, the family initially resided in Walker County, Alabama, before moving to Birmingham and eventually settling in Louisiana in 1990. Described as a bright and joyful individual, Tina's presence was said to light up the lives of those around her. During her childhood, Tina was diagnosed with paroxysmal supraventricular tachycardia, PSVT, a condition marked by an abnormally fast heart rhythm leading to symptoms like shortness of breath, lightheadedness, sweating, and palpitations. The prescribed medications provided limited relief and instead sapped her energy. At the age of 24, Tina underwent a minor procedure to address her PSVT. She pursued her education at the University of Alabama at Birmingham and, during that time, became engaged to Scott McCulloch. Unfortunately, their engagement was called off due to disapproval from Tina's mother. Later, Tina entered into a relationship with Gabe Watson. Born on March 5, 1977, David Gabe Watson, commonly known as Gabe, was recognized for his amiable and affable nature, easily forging connections with everyone he encountered. Smitten by Tina, they began their relationship shortly after meeting at a New Year's Eve celebration, despite Tina initially rebuffing his numerous attempts to ask her out. Following their graduation from the University of Alabama, Tina pursued a managerial role in a clothing store, while Gabe joined his father's company. Gabe, purportedly a qualified certified rescue diver, harbored a keen interest in scuba diving and engaged in the activity frequently. In contrast, Tina did not share the same enthusiasm for scuba diving. In January 2003, Tina initiated scuba diving lessons to share in Gabe's passion for the activity. Concerns arose among Tina's parents due to her previous heart condition, PSVT. Tommy, Tina's father, approached Gabe, expressing his worry about Tina's health. However, Gabe dismissed the concerns, asserting that both partners should engage in activities the other loved. Despite Tommy's uncertainty when Gabe inquired about authorizing their marriage, Gabe remained unperturbed. Gabe playfully teased Tina with a wedding ring but never formally proposed, citing a need for the right timing. On April 20, 2003, during an Easter egg hunt at their home, Gabe concealed an engagement ring within an egg and proposed to Tina after she discovered it. This gesture left Tina's parents displeased, viewing Gabe as someone who acted without considering others' opinions, and his desires always took precedence without scrutiny. On September 26, 2003, Tina approached her father, expressing the need to increase her life insurance and designate Gabe as the sole beneficiary. Skeptical and uncertain about the urgency, Tina's father hesitated and brushed off the matter until their return from the honeymoon. On October 11, 2003, Tina and Gabe exchanged vows of marriage. Immediately after their wedding, they embarked on their honeymoon the following day, heading to Australia for a 2-week getaway. During the initial week, they explored Sydney, and in the second week, they ventured to Townsville, Queensland. While in Townsville, they boarded the Spoilsport cruise ship, engaging in 25 scuba dives across various reef sites. Despite Tina's limited experience with only 5 dives compared to Gabe's 55, she felt secure due to Gabe's training as a rescue diver. As the couple prepared for a more challenging dive, Gabe declined the option of bringing a professional diver along, insisting on his certification and asserting his competence. However, concerns arose when Gabe encountered issues with his dive computer, causing unease for Tina. The dive computer was designed to track the duration and depth of dives, providing an estimate of the safe time to stay underwater before resurfacing. The particular dive they undertook was considered challenging due to its depth and the ocean's strong currents. With limited assistance available on the boat in case of emergencies, Gabe, before the dive, requested additional weight for Tina to enable her to descend further. Once Tina received the added weight, they began their descent. However, within a few minutes underwater, Gabe observed Tina displaying signs of concern and struggling to signal that something was amiss. According to Gabe, Tina accidentally dislodged his breathing mask, inducing a moment of panic. While fixing his mask, Gabe became distracted and, upon resolving the issue, observed Tina sinking towards the ocean floor. Despite being purportedly a certified rescue diver, Gabe, akin to lifeguards, swam to the surface and headed to the boat for assistance. Meanwhile, an underwater instructor named Wade, who was also submerged, noticed Tina's predicament, intervened, and brought her to the surface. Wade then transported Tina to another boat named Jazz 2, where he administered CPR for over half an hour. When questioned about his decision to leave Tina underwater, Gabe cited his lack of knowledge on how to bring someone back to the surface as his rationale. Without checking on Tina's well-being or whereabouts, Gabe returned to the original boat instead. Observers on the boat noted Gabe's peculiar behavior, expressing concern about his lack of apparent distress and his unusual requests for hugs from everyone. When assistance finally arrived, Tina was transported to the hospital. At the hospital, medical personnel found it unusual that Tina had very little water in her lungs, considering the circumstances where one would typically expect more water inhalation. Wade, the underwater instructor, also found it strange that Tina had sunk as scuba divers, unless weighted, are naturally buoyant and do not typically sink. When Wade swam to rescue Tina, he observed that she was wearing all her weights, prompting him to release her weight belt to expedite her ascent to the surface. During the subsequent investigation, detectives uncovered that Tina had been carrying 20 pounds of weight when only 8 pounds were necessary. Tragically, despite the efforts, Tina could not be saved and passed away at the hospital. Several divers who participated in the same dive asserted that they witnessed Gabe giving Tina a bear hug underwater while she was struggling. One of the divers took a photograph of his wife, and upon developing the photos, they realized that Tina was seen in the background at the bottom of the ocean, lying face up. During the questioning by detectives, Gabe's account was inconsistent, and there were contradictions in his narrative about how Tina sank. Gabe chose to communicate the details to his parents over the phone. Surprisingly, he declined to engage in a conversation with Tina's parents and instructed his parents to relay the information to them. The coroner concluded that Tina's cause of death was drowning, ruling it as an accidental occurrence without any signs of foul play. Tina's father was left in utter disbelief at these findings. Gabe, together with Tina's body, were flown back to the United States 5 days afterward. The funeral, attended by various family members and friends, witnessed a unanimous sentiment among them that Gabe's behavior was inappropriate. Whilst standing in front of the open casket, Gabe turned to his friend and said, "At least her breast looked perky." In adherence to the routine, Gabe later that year sent Tina's family a Christmas card featuring a picture of both of them from their wedding. On the card, Gabe penned his thoughts, "Who's that sexy guy next to Tina? Oh yeah, that's me." After the situation stabilized, Gabe attempted to file a claim against the travel agency for the disrupted trip. However, the insurance company notified him that neither Tina's life insurance nor the injuries sustained during scuba diving were covered by the insurance policy. Despite not believing a word of the account, Tina's father, Tommy, sensed the need to delve deeper into the situation. Several individuals from Spoilsport ship approached Tommy to assist him in uncovering the truth about his daughter. Following a conversation with one of the ship's crew members, he discovered that Gabe was not present on the ship during Tina's resuscitation. Motivated by this revelation, Tommy resolved to fly to Australia and conduct his investigation. Upon arriving in Australia, the initial individual Tommy engaged with was the diver responsible for bringing Tina to the surface of the ocean. Following discussions with the police and a meticulous examination of the case, the Townsville police concurred that there was substantial evidence indicating the possibility of foul play. In July 2004, a determination was made to classify the case not as an accident, but as a criminal investigation. The police highlighted numerous discrepancies in Gabe's narrative and the evidence presented. Contrary to Gabe's account, Tina's body was not located where he claimed it to be. Gabe asserted encountering 2 divers on his way to the surface, urging them to assist Tina, yet police discovered no supporting evidence of these alleged encounters. 2 other divers who were observing from a distance refuted Gabe's claim, asserting that there was no one in the vicinity of Gabe and Tina. Gabe's assertion that he rapidly ascended to assist Tina contradicted his dive computer data, which indicated a more deliberate ascent. Examination of Tina's dive computer revealed multiple rapid resurfacing instances during their scuba dive, suggesting panic. Detectives deduced that Tina, uncomfortable with diving, needed extra support, a fact later confirmed by her scuba instructor in court, emphasizing her lack of experience. The minimal amount of water in Tina's lungs suggested she likely passed out during the dive, her mouth relaxing off the mouthpiece, allowing water entry. Suspicions arose that Gabe may have deliberately cut off Tina's air until she lost consciousness, then resumed before leaving her submerged, potentially explaining her struggles witnessed by others. This theory was contested by dive experts who deemed it nearly impossible for Tina to reach the surface before running out of air. Further investigation revealed Gabe's proficiency in ocean rescues, prompting inquiries into the diving company's practices. It was uncovered that Gabe had misrepresented his diving experience, marking only 15 ocean dives instead of accurately portraying his skills. The company, misled by Gabe's repeated claims of being a certified diver, failed to assign a trained diver to accompany them, neglecting to address Tina's underwater panic, a crucial detail omitted by Gabe in his communications with the company. Tommy also shared that whenever he visited Tina's grave, the flowers he left mysteriously vanished, leading him to suspect theft. Gabe, expressing a desire to relocate Tina's body to his plot, moved her grave without placing a headstone, leaving it unmarked for 3 years. Upon discovering the new location, Tommy continued leaving flowers, only to find them gone the next day, and sometimes within hours. Disturbed by this, Tommy reported the situation to the police, prompting them to set up a camera near the grave to identify the culprit. The footage ultimately captured Gabe taking the flowers, with his justification being Tina's purported dislike for plastic flowers. Meanwhile, Gabe entered into a relationship with another lady identified as Kim, whom he married in August 2008. Australian authorities flew to Alabama to delve deeper into the case, uncovering unsettling information about Gabe's true character. It was revealed that Tina and Gabe had previously broken up before their engagement due to frequent quarrels, and during their separation, Tina went on a date, eliciting Gabe's furious reaction. Gabe resorted to name-calling and harassment. Despite reconciling and Gabe proposing to Tina, the police speculated that a potential motive for Gabe's actions could be linked to a life insurance payout. In May 2009, Gabe was extradited to Australia to face trial after reaching an agreement to lower the charges from murder to manslaughter. During the trial, he was found guilty of manslaughter and initially sentenced to 4.5 years. However, the judge opted to suspend the sentence to 12 months. The Alabama Attorney General contested the leniency of the sentence, filing an appeal that was approved, leading to an extension of the sentence to 18 months. Subsequently, the Alabama Attorney General sought to bring the case back to the United States for a retrial in Alabama, asserting the presence of additional evidence not presented during the Australian court proceedings. Australia insisted on a guarantee that Alabama would not pursue the death penalty before allowing any evidence from Australia to be transferred to the United States. Alabama agreed to the condition, leading to Gabe's return to the US, where he was taken into police custody for a retrial in Alabama. The Attorney General filed 2 charges, one for capital murder and another for kidnapping with deception. It was alleged that Gabe deceived Tina into taking diving lessons and traveling to Australia. Meanwhile, the Alabama courts removed Gabe as the administrator of Tina's estate, granting the role to Tina's father, Tommy. Despite Tommy's request for Tina's personal belongings, Gabe failed to return them. The trial commenced on February 13, 2012, coinciding with what would have been Tina's 35th birthday. However, peculiarly, the court in Alabama prohibited the mention of evidence about Gabe's unusual behavior and disallowed raising the life insurance claim. With this crucial evidence excluded, the judge determined insufficient grounds to convict Gabe of murder, resulting in his acquittal on all charges. Gabe claimed to be at peace with the verdict and expressed a desire to rebuild his life, but Tina's family was left without the closure they sought. Tina's untimely death cast a shadow over the dreams of a young couple in love, leaving her family and friends grappling with the pain of loss and the mystery surrounding that fateful day on the Great Barrier Reef. In the aftermath, the community came together to remember Tina, a vibrant spirit lost too soon, and to reflect on the fragility of life in the face of seemingly serene waters. The Tina Watson story is a somber reminder that even in the most beautiful places, tragedy can strike. May her memory inspire conversations about safety, transparency, and the pursuit of truth in the face of life's deepest mysteries. On May 12, 1985, a couple became concerned when they noticed their neighbors hadn't left their house for several days, and newspapers were accumulating at the door. Suspecting something was wrong, the husband decided to investigate. As he approached the window, he heard a baby crying and promptly called the authorities. When the officers arrived and entered the home, they were met with a horrifying scene. This is the heartbreaking case of the Eastburn family. The Eastburn family, a military household, resided in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Gary Eastburn was a captain in the U.S. Air Force. He met Catherine in the 1970s. Their young love blossomed into a lifelong commitment. For the Kansas girl, it seemed like love at first sight. After dating for 5 years, they married. They had 3 beautiful daughters, Cara, Erin, and Jana. Katie was a stay-at-home mom as they moved frequently due to Gary's military career. In 1983, they were stationed at Pope Air Force Base, where Gary served as the air traffic control chief. In May 1985, Gary was training at a squadron's officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, while his family stayed in Fayetteville. Life was as routine as it gets for a military family until they planned a move to England for Gary's job. Unfortunately, their hoped-for peace was shattered by a man in a horrific way. In addition to the Eastburn family, this story also involves a man named Timothy Bailey Hennis. Timothy Hennis, a Minnesota native, was navigating life at his own pace. Publicly, he appeared as an average man, a blonde-haired but easily noticeable due to his towering height of over 6 feet. He grew up in Rochester, Minnesota, and graduated from Mayo High School in 1976. Hennis worked in Rochester until he enlisted in the United States Army in 1980, marking a significant change in his life. He went on to marry Angela, who gave birth to their daughter Christina in 1985. Around the same time, Hennis was employed as a parachute rigger at Fort Bragg. The paths of the Eastburns and Timothy crossed on Tuesday, May 7, 1985, when he responded to an ad Catherine placed in the local paper to rehome their family dog. Due to their upcoming move to London, they couldn't bring the dog and were hopeful to find her a loving new home. Coincidentally, Hennis's family was seeking a dog, as their current one did not get along with their newborn. That Tuesday, Catherine invited Timothy over, and after some conversation, he took the dog to see if she would adapt to his family. By this time, Gary had been at the military base for a few weeks. Over the years, they had developed a habit of calling each other every Saturday morning since Gary spent most of his time on base. However, on Saturday, May 11th, Catherine didn't answer Gary's calls. Sensing something was wrong, Gary contacted the Fayetteville Police Department. Officers responded and visited the Eastburn home, but no one answered the door, and the house lights were off. Before leaving, they left a note for Catherine to contact her husband. On Sunday, May the 12th, the Eastburns' neighbors, Sergeant Bob Seafelt and his wife, noticed newspapers piling up outside. Reflecting on the past few days, they realized Catherine's car hadn't been moved. Bob decided to investigate, and although no one answered his knocking or the doorbell, he thought he heard a baby crying inside. So he went home and called the Eastburns' babysitter, who arrived quickly. She looked through the window and saw Jana lying in her crib with her arms outstretched. She tried to enter the house to get the baby, but Bob convinced her to wait for the police. The first officer to arrive opened a window in the baby's room and handed Jana to Bob. He asked the neighbor to wait outside while he searched the house, as there was a strong odor he needed to investigate. Inside, the officer found the lifeless bodies of Catherine and Erin and called for backup. Further inspection revealed Kara's remains as well. While the police secured the scene, Jana was cared for at the Seafelt home. The girl was sobbing and covered in feces. Doctors who treated her determined she was severely dehydrated and warned that her condition was critical. Without immediate help, she faced imminent death. Catherine, age 31, was discovered without pants or underwear, wearing a torn blouse and bra with multiple stab wounds and signs of assault. 3-year-old Erin was found in her parents' bedroom, also bearing stab wounds and blunt force injuries to her chest and back. 5-year-old Kara was located in her bed, appearing to hide under a blanket with various chest injuries. All 3 victims had their throats cut. Police established that 2-year-old Jana had been alone in her crib for 3 days until neighbors found her. When asked later about that night, survivor Jana told a child psychologist she hid because bad men were coming, possibly instructed by her sisters to remain hidden, which might have saved her from harm. Investigators also determined the perpetrator spared Jana's life, as he didn't think there was a risk that she would recognize him. Forensic experts collected samples from both the crime scene and the victims' bodies. Evidence included hair strands, fingerprints, blood traces, and seminal fluid, with the latter found during Catherine's examination. Despite the severity of injuries, little blood was found at the scene, yet a luminol test indicated blood had been wiped on walls and in the bathroom. Detective Jack Watts personally contacted Gary to inform him about the tragic events involving his family. When the phone rang in Gary's bedroom, he hoped to hear Catherine's voice, but upon learning it was a detective, he braced for devastating news. The officer instructed Gary to return immediately without disclosing details over the phone. That evening, Gary boarded a plane back to Fayetteville, unsure of what awaited him. Upon arrival, he faced the heartbreaking reality that his wife and 2 daughters had been murdered. However, he found solace in knowing Jana had survived. Gary cooperated fully with detectives despite his deep depression. Initially a suspect, His alibi of being in Alabama weeks prior to the crime quickly cleared him of suspicion. Gary's account highlighted two key details that piqued investigators' interest: the advertisement seeking a new home for their dog and Catherine's visit from a stranger on the 7th. According to Gary, Catherine had mentioned in a letter that a compassionate man had taken their dog in hopes of integrating it into his family. After obtaining Gary's statement, investigators escorted him home to ascertain any missing items. Gary reported that Catherine's bank card and a piece of paper containing her password were absent. Additionally, an envelope containing around $300 was nowhere to be found. The Eastburns babysitter also informed the police that Catherine had expressed concerns about being stalked. The family had endured harassing phone calls for months, with the caller occasionally making explicit references to Catherine. A few days before the tragedy, the babysitter answered a call from a woman named Angela who was interested in seeing the dog. The babysitter recorded Angela's details for Catherine to return the call. However, the note containing Angela's information was not discovered during the house search. During the investigation into the perpetrator's identity, 20-year-old Patrick Cohn approached investigators with potentially valuable information. Patrick recounted seeing a man leaving the Eastburn residence on the evening of Friday, May 10th, the day authorities believed the tragedy occurred. Patrick recalled that around 3:30 a.m. that Friday, while driving home, he observed a white Chevrolet Chevette parked in the driveway and witnessed a man exiting the house. Patrick provided a detailed description of the man, noting he was white, tall, with blonde hair, a broad nose, and a mustache. He mentioned the man wore a black jacket and jeans and was carrying a trash bag at the time. Investigators requested the young man's assistance in creating a composite sketch of the suspect. Subsequently, authorities disseminated the sketch and description of the individual. Additionally, a plea was issued for the man who had responded to Catherine's dog ad to come forward to the police. This appeal had the intended consequence. Timothy Hennis was at home with his wife watching the news when he saw the advertisement. He was stunned to realize that he was the person who had responded to the ad and bore a striking resemblance to the sketch. Without hesitation, Timothy immediately left his residence with his wife and daughter, driving his white Chevrolet to the police station, where he volunteered to assist in any way possible. Timothy cooperated with investigators for several hours without legal representation. When describing his interaction with Catherine on the 7th, he recounted parking his car at his residence around 9 p.m. and walking up the driveway with a leash in hand. According to his account, he knocked on the door and was greeted by a woman who invited him inside. Timothy continued, stating that Catherine informed him she had just put her 3 young daughters to bed and proceeded to introduce him to the dog. He mentioned liking the dog, but expressed interest in seeing how she would interact with his Spitz. Consequently, he agreed to take the dog home to his wife and daughter and assured Catherine they would stay in touch. Investigators established that the crimes occurred between Thursday evening and early Friday morning. It was on the 10th that newspapers began accumulating on the porch of the residence. Additionally, neighbors had spotted Catherine earlier on the 9th. Based on this evidence, law enforcement questioned Timothy about his activities that evening. He stated that he had driven his wife and daughter to a relative's house and then returned home. Authorities requested Timothy to provide samples of hair, blood, and seminal fluid, but forensic analysis did not link him to the crime. Simultaneously, police prepared a lineup for Patrick, who had identified Timothy from a photograph taken during a previous arrest due to bounced checks. When presented with 6 images, Patrick promptly identified Timothy. Timothy was released after several hours of questioning, and he drove back home. Police knew they had found their main suspect, and from that point on, they focused their investigation squarely on him, initiating interviews with his neighbors. Residents reported seeing him spending 5 hours near his home, burning items in a barrel, which drew attention as it was an unusual activity for him. Additionally, the dry cleaners confirmed that he had brought in his jacket for cleaning the day after the crime occurred. Another significant detail came from the landlord of Timothy's residence, who mentioned that Timothy promptly settled a $350 rent debt shortly after the incident. After the interrogations, Timothy and Angela believed their interactions with the police were over, but they were mistaken. Detectives arrived at their residence with an arrest warrant, charging the sergeant with sexual assault and first-degree murder of Catherine and her 2 daughters. In the course of the investigation, a woman came forward as a witness, providing crucial information linking the defendant to the use of the victim's debit card. Investigators determined that the stolen card was used at 10:54 p.m. on May 10th and 8:56 a.m. on May 11th. According to the witness, she had used the ATM shortly before seeing a tall blonde man in camouflage pants drive away in a light-colored vehicle. The timing described by the witness aligned with the recorded banking transactions. Detectives connected the $300 cash withdrawal to the previously mentioned overdue rent payment. Timothy retained a prestigious legal team, represented by Gerald Beaver and Billy Richardson, renowned as top attorneys in North Carolina. Prosecutors proposed a plea bargain to Timothy's defense, offering 2 counts of second-degree murder with a probable sentence of 2 consecutive life terms. He rejected the offer, maintaining his innocence and refusing to plead guilty. The defense strategy aimed to undermine the credibility of a key prosecution witness. They replicated the moment Patrick identified a man as Timothy by revisiting the Eastburn house under similar lighting and weather conditions. However, the witness did not spot the suspect during the reenactment. An unexpected development arose during the site inspection when a neighbor approached them, revealing he had observed a van parked outside the family's residence on the night of the crime. He recalled seeing a white man with short hair, accompanied by companions. A subsequent reenactment with Patrick suggested he might have misidentified the suspect. The defense attorneys then focused on discrediting a prosecution witness, the woman who had initially claimed to have seen the suspect at the ATM. During cross-examination, she recanted her statement, asserting that she had not witnessed anyone there that day. Timothy's first trial commenced in 1986, approximately a year after the triple homicides. The prosecution's case relied on circumstantial evidence, lacking any physical proof linking the sergeant to the murders. One theory proposed was that Timothy's advances towards Catherine were rebuffed, leading to a sexual assault followed by his decision to eliminate her and her daughters to prevent identification. During the trial, the prosecutor portrayed the events at the Eastburn residence as sheer madness, describing it as one of the most tragic incidents in the nation's history up to that time. His argument was accompanied by a presentation of numerous disturbing crime scene photographs. Patrick served as the key prosecution witness before the jury, positively identifying the defendant as the man he had observed leaving the Eastburn home in the early hours of May 10, 1985. On July 4, 1986, following 10 hours of deliberation, a jury convicted Timothy on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of first-degree sexual assault. Just 4 days later, on July 8th, he received a death sentence and was transferred to death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. However, this marked only the conclusion of the initial chapter in a protracted legal saga, as Timothy's defense remained steadfast in their quest to establish his innocence. By 1988, his legal team appealed to the North Carolina Supreme Court, citing investigation inconsistencies, false testimony, evidence suppression, and improper use of graphic materials that had swayed the jury's verdict. Consequently, the justices ruled in Timothy's favor, overturning the previous trial and initiating a new one that commenced in April 1989. During this retrial, the defense concentrated on discrediting Patrick's testimony, arguing its inaccuracies from the first trial. New witnesses emerged in Timothy's support, including a newspaper delivery woman who testified that at 1:45 a.m. on the day of the incident, she had spotted a long-haired man driving a light-colored van near the Eastburns' residence. In a similar vein, the defense presented another witness, a tall teenager with blonde hair named John Raupour, who testified that he frequently walked near the Eastburn residence late at night when he couldn't sleep. He admitted passing by around 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985, mentioning he often wore a cap and had a black jacket resembling the one described by the witness. This testimony allowed the defense to argue that Patrick might have mistaken John for the suspect that critical day, planting reasonable doubt about Timothy's culpability in the minds of the jury. The defense also highlighted that shoe prints discovered outside the Eastburn house were 3 sizes smaller than those of the defendant. Additionally, it was noted that a blood sample from a towel did not match Timothy's blood profile. Further bolstering their case was an anonymous letter processed by the post office on the same day as the trial. The letter expressed remorse to Timothy and confessed to the crimes committed. The trial spanned 3 weeks, and after 2 days of deliberation, the jury unanimously acquitted Timothy of all charges. Timothy left the courtroom as a free man. He later re-enlisted in the military and in 1998 relocated with his wife and children to Fort Lewis, Washington. After the initial trial, Gary moved on with his life and focused on caring for Jana. Despite scrapping plans to relocate to London following the death of his wife and 2 children, he concluded in 1988 that a change of surroundings was necessary and decided to relocate to England. While there, he was informed of the need to return to the United States for a retrial. Once the trial concluded, he returned to England where he met and married an Air Force nurse. In 1998, Gary returned to the US, settling in a town 20 kilometers from Fort Lewis. In 2005, the unresolved Eastburn family murder case was discussed at a seminar on advanced criminal intelligence techniques for detectives. It was there that Larry Trotter, a homicide detective from Cumberland County, learned about seminal fluid samples collected during the initial investigation, which had previously not yielded any matches. Aware of advancements in DNA analysis, Larry arranged for further testing of these samples stored by the sheriff's office. A year later, the results from the State Bureau of Investigation lab were returned. With the test results came the long-awaited revelation. The DNA profile matched that of Timothy Bailey Hennis. Adding to the clarity, the forensic scientist affirmed that the sample was 1 billion times more likely to belong to Timothy than to any other resident of North Carolina. Larry Trotter promptly shared this breakthrough with the district attorney, who then contacted Gary Eastburn. Confident that they had the right suspect, and now armed with concrete evidence, the DA transferred the case to Fort Bragg's legal team, who presented it to the base commander general. In response, the commander ordered Timothy to be activated for duty to face 3 charges of murder and a court-martial. On September 26, 2006, accompanied by a military lawyer, a Fort Bragg CID officer, and 2 police officers, Timothy was formally served a letter directing him to report to base within 30 days. Despite the pending charges, he reported for duty and began working part-time in an office role, receiving regular pay and benefits. In August 2007, the commander of the 16th Airborne Corps ordered Timothy Hennis to stand trial in a court-martial on 3 counts of premeditated murder. By December 2007, Hennis filed an appeal arguing that the Army lacked jurisdiction, but his petition was denied in April 2008. In May 2008, Hennis further appealed the court-martial decision to the United States Army Court of Criminal Appeals, only to have it dismissed the following month. Continuing his efforts in September 2008, Hennis appealed to the United States Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, which also dismissed his appeal. Undeterred, Hennis pursued another appeal in December 2009 at the United States District Court for the Eastern District of North Carolina, but once again it was rejected in March 2010. Timothy's court-martial commenced on March 17, 2010, marking 21 years since his previous acquittal. Colonel Patrick Parrish presided over the proceedings, where prosecutors emphasized the new DNA evidence as the pivotal difference from previous trials. The prosecution presented crime scene photographs and a series of family photos provided by Gary, depicting his smiling wife and daughters. Following a 3-week trial, Timothy Hennis was convicted of premeditated murder on April 15, 2010, and sentenced to death. He was dishonorably discharged from the Army and confined to Fort Leavenworth's disciplinary barracks in Kansas. He remains the only individual to undergo 3 trials from not guilty to guilty verdicts. Presidential approval is required for military executions, a rarity since the 1960s, making his actual execution unlikely. In February 2020, the Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces denied his appeal. Gary Eastburn commented on the sentence, expressing doubt about Timothy's imminent execution, citing the last Army execution in 1961. In a 2010 interview with the Seattle Times, Gary remarked, "I'm perfectly content if he spends the rest of his life in prison. But if they do execute him, it's no more than he deserves." It is sad and unfortunate what all the victims faced against this monster. As we reflect on this heart-wrenching tale, our thoughts are with the victims whose lives were tragically cut short and the loved ones they left behind.